All right, hello. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to another installment on the recovery show. How about that? That's what we're gonna call it tonight. 12-step recovery, AANA, and this is just my experience. I'm sharing my experience on the program. For right now, I'm just gonna call it the program. And tonight, we're going to be going over the 11th step, step 11. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Now, before I get into the topic or into the step, I like to make a statement. You know, in recovery, like doctors have a language. They have a language. Plumbers have a language. That's strictly for their trade. And recovery has a language. You know, when we talk about certain things in recovery, it doesn't necessarily mean what it might mean. For example, when I talk about God, when I mention the word God, and notice it says God as we understood him, as we understood him. I'm not talking about, this is not necessarily about a God from any doctrine. And I'm shooting this out directly to the religious people and the non-religious people. So when I talk about God or I mention the word God, I'm only mentioning the word God as I'm using this God as a reference point. You know, we can call it the source of all living things, or you can call it whatever you want to call it. But it's just the only word that we have in the English language to point to a supreme being or the source of everything. That's what I mean when I say God. I don't mean not necessarily from any type of dogma or doctrine. I'm not referring to God in that manner. But if that's the way you understand God, then fine. You know, this is and I don't want to get people to get lost in the sauce of semantics. You know, when I talk about we, when I mention we, for example, I mean we as in the collective. But I also mean it mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, which is the basic makeup of the human being. So there's the collective here, and then there's the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional part of the human being. So before I get into this step, I wanted to put that out there because if it's any atheist or agnostic, now another word I want to look at is him. You know, I don't necessarily mean him as in a male. You know, it's just the way the step was written out. And I'm not going to change it. But you could put female, you could put whatever you want to there. But him is not in this, for the purpose of this presentation, is not gender specific. You know, it's just happened to be the way the English language is, because in some languages there are words that are not gender specific, but this is just a handicap of the English language. So moving on with this, we saw through prayer, and now when I talk about prayer, let me get off into the prayer thing too. Prayer doesn't necessarily mean like you on your knees or you in a or you bowing down. It doesn't mean that. It's just mean how you communicate with the source. Your way of communicate. Because I heard a dude say something that gave me an eye opener. It was like okay. And he had referred to prayer as begging. He said, I don't pray as begging. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, for real. I was like, all right, this guy say, prayer is begging. So I immediately wanted to address that. Prayer is just a way of that the individual communicates to the quote unquote God. And also God could also mean good orderly direction. That's how I use it. I use God as good orderly direction. I don't necessarily mean it as the supreme type being. And when I say good orderly direction, I'm mainly referring to the steps. That's right. I'm referring to the steps. So that being said, meditation. When I talk about meditation, I'm not necessarily talking about any meditation is in yoga, or I'm just talking about how you, because some people put on music and they meditate. You understand what I'm saying? Some people, they'll sit down and or lay down. They have their own position. So however these words mean to you, the we, the God, the prayer, the meditation. And understand that within the step, there is a word that says, as we understood, past tense. So that's also an indication of your own experience. Not my experience, not the church's experience, the mosque, the temple, your mama, your daddy, or your grandmama, and your granddaddy. It's how you understood based on your experience, based on your own life experience. So let's jump into the step. Step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. Praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And the power to carry that out. And I got it on the blackboard if you could see it. I don't think you could see it though. But I wrote it on this here blackboard. So let's move on. So what's happening is starting off with the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness, which are the keys to the step. By the time by the time the individual or the group get to the 11th step, the primary spiritual principle here is open-mindedness. It's open-mindedness. Now, remember, the keys to the steps in the fellowship, in both fellowships, or in all the fellowships is what? Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Now, going to the honesty part, notice I didn't say truthfulness. I said honesty. Why honesty? Because, now remember when I was saying that plumbers have a language that's to their trade, doctors have a language to their trade, politicians have they'll have languages to their trade or words to their trade, so as to in the recovery process. So honesty here means, when I say honesty, I mean a verbal statement followed by a physical action. A verbal statement that's followed or that's consistent with an action. Something we can all see. So it's two-part. whereas truth is only a verbal statement. And they both could be negative or positive. They could both be negative or positive. Willingness. Only thing willingness means here is that there is no action, but that means that the individual or the group is poised to do something or not to do something. And then open-mindedness means to be exactly what it means, just to have an open-mindedness. That don't mean that you have to give up your point of view about anything that's said. It's just that there's a consideration. I believe the word is called being objective, to be objective. That means you're not giving up your own point of view about something. What you're basically doing is saying, okay, I'll listen to what you got to say. So moving on, it says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, and we're going to deal with that. And notice I said before, the we is the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional part of the human or the collective inside of a meeting. And what's happened in the 11th step is that the individual or the group has done every step, the open-mindedness, the willingness, and the honesty part. And so they've done every step, the first step. They went into the first step, they looked at the addiction, see how they became powerless powerless and unmanageable over the addiction. And remember I said in a previous video that addiction is only is one addiction, and that is obsessive thinking and compulsive behavior. Very simple. But there are many symptoms to the addiction, and the symptoms are gambling, sex, drugs, alcohol, overeating, cars, money, hustling, anything you want to put in that slot that cause the individual or the group to become obsessed and compulsed over that. And understand this, a group can have more than one symptom. So as we move on to step two, step two says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And so in step one, the unmanageability was the physical reaction to the insanity. It was the insanity. And so the power greater than ourselves was something that happened in that moment, that caused the individual what? To change their mind. It affected their addiction or addictive behavior, which is the thinking. Remember, inside of alcoholism and addiction, it affects the thinking. It affects the thinking. Now, at this point, I want to make a personal observation. The thinking in the mental brain, because the human body has three brains. We got the brain inside the skull, we got the brain inside the heart or the chest, and then we have a brain inside the stomach. And I'll be going over those in the latter video. But, however, addiction affects our thinking. And I'm referring to the skull, your brain. So moving on, when I talk about a power greater than ourselves, I'm going to refer to the addiction first, and then anything else that could change your mind in the here and now. And why do I say addiction is a power greater than oneself. Well, how did you end up in the 12-step program? How did you end up in treatment? How did you lose your whatever it is that you lost? You lost it in the moment. And it was through the symptoms of your addiction. And some people say God. I say keep an open mind about that. Because step 2 is a step of open-mindedness. Step 2, as in any fellowship, asks the individual to become open-minded. And let me back up. When I say any fellowship, I mean any fellowship where there's a step 2, because some fellowships do not have step 2. They don't. So moving on, it says could restore us to sanity and not would restore us to sanity. So could is a condition there. And the condition is that if my mind is open. Very simple. In step 3, it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And like I said before, this is not a God of dogma. This is not this is not that God. This is a God based on your own experience and understanding, keeping it very short and very simple. And if you're an agnostic, if you don't have no understanding of God, and if you're an agnostic and atheist, and you say there's no God, that's exactly what I mean. That's what I mean that too. So moving on, it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives. And what is the will? The will is in the thinking. And that's why I said the brain and not the heart and not the stomach. Although we will get into that a little later on when we start talking about black hearts and overeating. Yes, sir. So anyway, but I will say this. Inside the brain, there is a vein. It's called the Venous, the Venous, I forget the name of it, but it starts with the V. And this runs from the back of the brain stem all the way to the heart and to the stomach. And it's in communication with all 3 central areas. So anyway, moving on, we're gonna deal with that a little bit later. So inside the decision to turn the will and the life over, it was made from the prior 2 steps. When I saw that I was powerless over my addiction, I had no control over my thinking, and that manifested in my behavior, that my life had become unmanageable, that my day-to-day living, that's all that means when it says lives. That means my day-to-day living had become unmanageable. And then in step 2, the power greater than myself, that restored me to sanity in the moment, whatever it was. It could have been the police. We call it very simply hitting bottom. Whatever caused me to hit my bottom, the process of hitting my bottom, that's how I was restored to sanity in that area only. So what happened? In step 4, I made a fearless, it says we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, inside the inventory is not a question of things I did bad. It was what I did good. Because what some people have a habit of doing was, I committed murder. I raped a boy down the street. I raped a girl down the street. I was a cougar. And they go through all this stuff. I robbed, I stole. It's not that type of an inventory. This inventory is really designed for the individual to write down certain patterns that show what? The thinking, how certain thoughts and how certain behavior patterns got started as a result of traumatic events in the individual's life that develop what? A shadow self, very simply. And then in step 5, it says, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, remember when I talked about in the 4th step, I said patterns and thinking. I brought that up. In step 5, it talks about the exact nature. And the exact nature in this instance is how something began or got started. Whether it was things that brought on shame, guilt, resentment, anger, fear, but also things that brought on joy, happiness, peacefulness, serenity. Those type of things has to be included there because recovery is a balance, creates the balance. However, in step 6, it says, we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. And it says, God remover. But step 6 is a step of willingness. If I'm not willing, God ain't removing. Step 6 is a step of willingness. So if I'm not willing to have anything removed, God ain't going to do it. I have to become willing. And usually how people become willing is they hit a bottom. Most people don't just wake up and say, well, I guess I'm going to stop using today or stop drinking today or stop whatever it is they doing. They usually have they usually experience some type of a situation that caused them to look at whatever it is that's going on that they want to give up. That's what's happening with that. And then it's so the reason why the God is used in there is not so much a God in heaven is going or in some type of dogmatic situation is going to remove something from somebody. Nah, it's not that. Like I said, I look at good orderly direction. That's God for me. And where do I find good orderly direction is when I work the steps, all the way back in step 3. So let me say this. When I turned my will and my life over to God, when I made that decision as a result of step 2, for me it was I made a decision to work the program. That's right. I didn't turn my will and life over to nothing that I made it very simply. I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the 12-step program. I said, I'm a learn spiritual principles. That's what happened with me. And like I said, I'm sharing my experience. And so moving on, back to step 7, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. Now understand this, there is a difference between a character defect and a shortcoming. Very simple. A character defect is just a simple defect in our character. It's just like this glass right here. See this glass? I got this glass, and the glass might have a crack in it, a small crack, but nothing's leaking out. It's just a crack. That's a defect. Now, a shortcoming is when the crack turns into a hole and stuff is leaking out. That's a defect. Now remember, I said earlier, And recovery, we're going to have our own terms. Because I know somebody out there saying, well, you know, the crack is a defect too. The crack is a defect too. However, the defect is a shortcoming. Excuse me. Yeah, a defect is a shortcoming in action in terms of recovery. Remember, I said we got our own language, right? And as you'll find out, some of it is even esoteric. Some of it is even esoteric. Because the program, based on the individual, is metaphysical. But what has happened, and I'll get off into this later, is people of influence have turned it religious. And we'll deal with that later. So moving on, inside of step 7, it says, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. But let me back up. In 6, it says, we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. And it says these, not those. And what is these? These are the defects that's getting us in trouble in the here and now, in the right now. They got me in so much trouble, I said, God, damn, I'm willing to give this up right here. I'm willing to give up the drugs, the alcohol, the hoes, the hustling, because I'm tired of going to jail. I'm tired of not having no money, paying all these lawyers. I'm tired of, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's how that come about. So it says these defects. Why? Because, let me back up. See, one of the mistakes that a lot of people do in recovery, they will work 6 by itself, but 6 and 7 should be worked together. Step 1 should be worked by itself. Step 2 should be worked by itself. Step 3 should be worked by itself. 4 and 5 should be worked together. And 6 and 7 should be worked together. Why? Because you can see the contrast of each step and how they're different. So let's move on, because we're working towards step 11. And I'm trying to get there and not be here an hour at least anyway. So in 7, it says, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. Now remember, I said a character defects is a shortcoming in action. And what is the humbling part? It ain't because I woke up one morning and I said, I want to stop gambling, I want to stop getting high, I want to stop drinking. Nah, it was because the humility came when I started paying the price of working using character defects in my life, turning them into shortcomings. So let's move on to step 8. In step 8, it says, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. It says we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing. Didn't say we did. It said we became willing to make amends to them all. And this is where a lot of people need some help. This is where a lot of people need some help. Because, number one, when you make a list of all persons you had harmed, so you're going to put family members, you're going to put jobs, institutions, anything you could think of, you're going to put down on that list. But here's what has to happen. See, because step 8 has a mercy to it. And the mercy to step 8 is that you look at the relationship and determine, based on what the relationship should be, what type of amends should be made. Very simple. So like between me and my mother, like my mother was on my 8th step list. And then I had some people in the street that was on my 8-step list, you know, like dope man and a couple prostitutes and whatever. Now, my mother deserved an amends. But let me back up. Let's define what amends is. And amends is more than just saying I'm sorry. Like a lot of times people say, oh, I need to make amends, so, you know, I'm sorry. That's not amends. That's an apology. That's exactly what it is. It's an apology. And of course, you can make an apology. You can go tell somebody you're sorry. But what an amends means in terms of recovery, it's twofold. Once I look at the relationship and I determined that, well, I said, well, I need to go tell this person, I said, I'm sorry because you know, I broke in their house, you know, and stole their TV, or they put me in a position of trust and I let them down. But amends is twofold. It's the admission, but it's also changing the behavior. That's exactly what it is. Amends is changing behavior. Not the amends to them, but the amends to myself. I amend my own behavior that I acted out in that relationship. So if I owed the bank, for example, I go to the bank, I make a payment plan, and I pay my bills. Not only to the bank, I pay on to everybody else. That's how that step go. And you'll hear some people say they won't make your 8-step list. Why? Because you're changing your behavior. That's going to take care of them too. Even the dead people, the people that you never see. Well, you know, my Uncle Johnny died. You know, I stole this color TV, and I'll never be able to make amends. Sure, you make amends. You stop stealing. That's how the amends go. And step 8 is a step of what? Honesty, open-mindedness. Willingness, honesty, open-mindedness. Willingness, honesty, open. And it's a step of open-mindedness. You're open to change. And then you determine what spiritual principles that you need to implement in your life. So let's go to step 9. We make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so will injure them or others. So in step 9, it says we make direct amends to such people. That means the people that are available. That's such people. Except when to do so, it said, except when to do so will injure them or others. You are others. So I'm not going to go making no amends to somebody that want to shoot me, cut me, or hurt me. You don't make those type of amends to those type of people. And I tell you from experience, the people that come from your 8-step list to your 9-step list, believe me, God will put them in your life. You ain't got to go looking for nobody. Because that's why it says to such people wherever possible and not whenever. Whenever is when you go trotting off looking for certain ones. But wherever is when the situation arises. Now understand, like I said before, in recovery, there we have our own language. That words will mean certain things only in this format. Now, step 10. We continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. And step 10 is done on a regular basis. And some people say it should be done daily. But I would say this. Step 10 inventory should be done 3 times a week. Bare minimum. Bare minimum. If you're in the process, you should be doing this inventory 3 times a week. And it's different ways you could do a 10th step. You could do it right out of the basic text. We have a book called, an NA anyway, the Step Working Guide that has a 10th step inside the big book. I think I got one. Inside the big book, bam. Inside the big book, there's a 10th step in there. Or you can go online and say 10th step inventory, and by golly, there's one there. So now we are at the doorstep of step 11. Once we have an understanding of, and you don't need to have be in a program 5, 10, 15, 20 years to do this step. You know, all you need is a understanding. And when I say a, that means that there are plenty of examples out there. There's plenty of experience out there that the individual can have. So you have your own understanding. So it says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, not understand. Why is it understood and not understand? Because if you understand something, that means ... .com. There's no room for growth there. But if you understood something, that means that you have past experience in this, which came from the previous 10 steps, and there's room for growth. As you said, we sought through prayer and meditation. And that prayer could simply mean, okay, what you want me to do next? What you want me to do next? And that's going to be based on your own understanding and experience and meditation. I don't have to be sitting by the river with my fingers, fold up in the thing, sitting cross-legged, talking about, Nah. But you can have a meditation. You could be listening to a record and something pop up in your mind and say, okay, go feed the poor people. To improve and that would improve your conscious contact. But the improvement comes through what? The practice of spiritual principles. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, surrender, faith, love, charity. That's where the understanding comes from. It says to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us. And say, okay, well, what is God's will for me? Well, we know it's not using. We know it's not drinking. We know it's not gambling. We know it's not overeating. We know it's not none of that stuff. So let's start on what God's will is not. But in the moment, the manifestation will be shown. And it's going to be based on your own capacity to do whatever it is, to do or not to do. And it says, only for God's will for us, only for knowledge of God's will for us, and the power to carry that out. And why does it say the power to carry that out? Well, usually when something is revealed, because it will be revealed, and that's what that is, it's the revelation, that's what that is. And the power is the intestinal fortitude or the courage to do whatever it is that needs to be done. That's all the 11th step is talking about. It's like, well, what you want me to do? Or what do I need to do? And then the meditative part is just that quietness. It just pops up. You could be listening to a record. You could be sitting on the beach. Well, you could open up a newspaper. That's step 2 stuff. You could open up a newspaper, or somebody could come and tell you, hey, we need this type of assistance that you have over there. Can you show up? And you take a moment of silence. And you say, yeah, I could do that. That's the power to carry that out. So wrapping this up, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Tell me what you like in the comments about this, about what you say, but about what I said. Hit the like, hit the like button, or even hit the dislike button, but hit that button. So this is what that step is talking about. It's not talking about necessarily that the church movement that I belong to, or whatever it is. What it's saying is that if something needs to be done or not done, and I could do it, let me go do that. That I take the initiative to do it. So with that, I'd like to say thank y'all for letting me share. I'll be back real soon. I said I was going to do one on how the 12 steps is a key component for healers. Whether you, or what modality of healing that you do. And I promise that's going to be my next one. I'll probably be in Detroit when I do that Saturday night, which would be the 2nd of April, 2020. 2022. All right, then. So I'd like to say thank y'all for letting me share, and keep coming back. You don't have to use no drugs. You ain't got to use no sex, no gambling. You can stop hustling. You ain't got to overeat. Oh, while I'm on it, I will be doing a piece on the 3 brains. The brain in the head, the brain in the heart, and the brain in the stomach, and their correlation to each other and addiction. On how not only addiction affects the thinking in the brain, but it affects the heart. That's why we hear about the black heart. But it also affects the stomach area. Oh yeah, the stomach is definitely a brain. Scientifically proven, as a matter of fact. Just like the heart. Just like the heart. So we're going to be talking about that probably a week from today, Wednesday. And with that, stay tuned. Hit that button. Hit that subscribe button. All right, thanks for letting me share. And with that, I'm going to find this button that says stop